Hey guys. Okay, so in this video today, I want to talk about sugar addiction. I know several people asked about, how to break sugar addiction or what to do if you feel like you can't stop eating sugar. And, this is a topic that's getting a lot of attention. There's books out there about breaking your sugar cycle and, diet plans and videos and documentaries and all this kind of stuff about, sugar and how it's kind of the root of all evil, so to speak. That's not exactly my take on it, but it is something that ultimately, if it's something that you feel like is an issue for you and you can't stop doing it, that's where we want to kind of take a look at what could be going on a deeper level. And you might say, well, mine's not so much sugar, but maybe I feel like maybe I'm drinking a little bit too much, or it's the bag of potato chips or something else. So it doesn't necessarily have to be sugar. Some of the things we're talking about today can apply to other habits that you feel like you've created that aren't necessarily in your best interest, or just that you feel out of control with. That's really, I think, the issue for a lot of people. And I do kind of want to stress that, because I don't think sugar is evil, or wine is evil, or potato chips are evil. I think the issue comes in for people when they just feel like they've lost control with those things, or they've created this habit and they don't know how to break it. So that's what I really want to focus in on today, is not so much all the issues with sugar. That's a whole nother long video. In fact, I have a couple documentaries I can point you to that kind of go into really what's going on with sugar itself. But I want to talk really more about habits and how we make them and why they're so hard to break, and what we can kind of do about that. Because what I know does not work for a fact is that you beat yourself up, that you assume you have no willpower, that you assume you have no self-discipline, or you're just lazy, or you're just whatever, okay? That never works. And I'm not just saying that to be nice, make you feel good. I'm saying that because all that will do is keep that cycle going, okay? You'll feel bad, and then you will set yourself up, and then you will fail, and then you will feel bad again, and the cycle goes on and on. So I want you to take a step back for a second, and I want to talk about some other things going on that for me have been incredibly helpful. There's a couple resources. One in particular is Brooke Castillo. I know I've shared some of her podcasts before, but she has some really great videos on her website, which I'll link up for you guys, one on over drinking and one on overeating, that explain, some of the things I'm going to explain to you guys today, and then she goes into some more detail with some of the overeating stuff and hormones and all that. So if this kind of piques your interest and you want to learn more, I'll link up some other resources and some documentaries and some other things you can check out. But what I really want to talk about today is how we form these habits and why they're so powerful and why they're so hard to break, and why our traditional ways of trying to break habits don't work, which is really that white knuckling willpower doesn't work, and I'll explain why. So first of all, I want to really quick just give an overview of the brain. Obviously the brain is incredibly complicated, but for our purposes today, I want you to think about two parts of the brain and how they relate to all this. So the first one is our prefrontal cortex. And this is what I call the adult brain. And what I mean by that, this is our evolved brain. And this is the part of the brain that we use to think and to plan and to analyze. And so it's kind of our mature brain. And then there's another part of our brain called the basal ganglia, which is responsible for more basic functions and more automatic functions, okay? So when we create, a habit, that's going to happen more or be triggered more from that part of the brain. And the reason this is important is because think about all the things. I would say 80 to 90% of what we do in our day probably is on auto mode, right? You're getting up in the morning, you have your little routine, you're brushing your teeth, you're getting dressed, you're driving. All of these things, we're not having to actively think like, what's the next step? What do I do now, right? They've just become habit, right? And that's great, because if we had to consciously think about all those things, we wouldn't be able to do anything else. We wouldn't be able to plan and do that work project and think ahead and be creative with our prefrontal cortex, because it would be preoccupied with these, these processes that we have to do each day. So it's a good thing. I call it the toddler brain, which isn't to say it's bad. It's just that it's responsible for more of these kind of automatic things that we do throughout the day. Now, how does this relate to sugar addiction and habits? One of the things that's a part of creating a habit. So let's say that I do something new. Let's say that one night I'm exhausted. It's been a crazy day at work. The kids have been wild, and I get done with my day and I go and I get a big bowl of ice cream and I eat that ice cream. When I eat that sugar, I get a release of something called dopamine. And dopamine is a chemical in the brain that makes us feel good, okay? And this actually goes back to our kind of primitive caveman days when you didn't have food readily available. So if you were out scavenging for food and you came across something like berries, in comparison to a lot of the other plants around, this would have a higher dosage of sugar. So if you're caveman, you say, what is this? You eat these berries, you get this release of dopamine. And that release of dopamine is doing more than just making you feel good. It's signaling to you, this is a good source of energy. Pay attention. Where are you? Where is this growing? We want to come back. We want to get more of this. Okay? So it's a way of survival. But in our modern day, when we're eating a bowl of ice cream, we found a way to take out the good stuff that's in the berries and just concentrate down the sugar to get this really high hit, essentially, of dopamine, right? This really fast, really big hit of dopamine. And so we're still getting the same sort of reaction, which is, oh wow, I just had this bad day. Now I have this bowl of ice cream. I feel better. I want to do this again. And if I continue to every night put the kids down, and go through my little routine and get that bowl of ice cream, my prefrontal cortex is going to pretty quickly say, okay, this is a habit. We're getting a reward for this, and we're going to go ahead and put this into that more toddler brain, that basal ganglia, and let this become just a habit that we do. So the reason I call it the toddler brain is because if you think about anyone that has kids or has been around kids, you know that when you, number one, break a kid's habit and or take away a reward that they're used to having, or basically just don't give them something they want, what is the reaction of the child typically? They're probably going to have a tantrum, right? So let's just take this example and say that every time I go to a store, let's say every time I take my kid to Target, I say, okay, if you're good today, I'm going to get you a lollipop. And we do this 50 times. And then one day I just decide, you're not getting a lollipop today, all right? Everyone that has kids is like, because you know what's happening, right? That kid is going to freak out. That kid is going to have a meltdown in the aisle of Target, right? And you almost can't blame them, right? Because number one, I've broken your routine and I've taken away your reward. So they're powerless, right? They can't overtake me physically. They can't pay for the lollipop. So they're gonna do the only thing they know to do, which is to completely freak out and have a temper tantrum and melt down. So this is kind of what's happening in our brain when we just decide we're suddenly going to stop doing this habit. If every night I'm having the bowl of ice cream or the bowl of potato chips or the glass of wine, and then I all of a sudden decide I'm not going to do it, my toddler brain, number one, you're disrupting that neural pathway. And number two, you're taking away that hit of dopamine. It is going to freak out. And it, as Brooke Castillo describes it, it literally thinks it's going to die if you don't give it the sugar or the wine or the potato chips or whatever. And so you might have actually felt that on some level, like, I can't not have the sugar, I can't. And it kind of seems crazy almost, because you can not have it, but yet it feels physically like you have to have it. And it will almost become, it's like you're thinking about it more and more and more until you just have to go and have the bowl of ice cream or the glass of wine or whatever. So that's what's going on at sort of that neurological level, is that, again, that toddler brain is having a meltdown, essentially. It's having a temper tantrum because you're not giving it what it wants. And if we're not aware of that, because it's such a primal need, it feels like such a primal need, we will give into it, absolutely. And then we think, oh my gosh, I have no willpower. I did it again. And we'll beat ourselves up about it, okay? Now, just like the kid having the temper tantrum, right? Here's where we have to be careful, because as a parent, okay, if my kid has a temper tantrum because they didn't get what they wanted, and I now give them that thing, what does my child learn? Right, they're learning, oh, if I have a temper tantrum, I'm gonna get what I want. And so it's kind of the same thing with this habit we've created. It's really tough, but once we're aware of it, we have to understand that whatever the triggers may be, maybe it's having a stressful day, maybe it's, having a fight with your friend, or whatever that comfort thing is that you go to, breaking that habit can be really tough, because your brain is saying, okay, whenever we feel emotionally uncomfortable, we turn to the ice cream, we turn to the wine, we turn to the potato chips. And now you're saying not to do that. I'm going to have a fit. But the thing that we want to keep in mind now is that every time we reward the brain, as a way of getting rid of the emotional pain or whatever, we're continuing to teach it, essentially if you have a temper tantrum, you're going to get that dopamine hit. So I think that as far as how do you deal with this, number one is just being aware of what's going on. Just kind of paying attention and telling yourself you're going to feel on some level like, I'm going to die if I don't have this, but understanding that's not really what the case is. Another thing that I think can be helpful is to find some healthier alternatives that could be a substitute for whatever the thing is. So instead of just saying, no, you can't have the thing, finding a way to, maybe come up with some healthy dessert options so that you're giving your brain something, but you're not getting such a strong hit of dopamine, and it makes it a little bit easier to kind of phase out of that. So the last thing that I would say, and this is something that Brooke Castillo talks about that I think is really powerful too, is to not make the sugar or the wine or the potato chips or whatever the enemy, okay? Don't try to fight that urge because you won't win. Instead, I think an important thing is to learn how to feel uncomfortable. I mean, this is something I'm working on too. We live in a society where if you're uncomfortable, there's a quick fix. If you're hot, turn on the AC. If you're cold, turn on the heat. If you're hungry, there's food easily available. We don't really have to feel uncomfortable, right? Whatever it is that we feel like we need, we're able to pretty quickly quelch that desire. And so learning how to be uncomfortable. So I want the sugar, but I'm saying no to that. It feels uncomfortable. My toddler brain is screaming at me, but that's okay. I'm not going to fight the toddler, right? I'm not going to yell back. I'm not going to white knuckle it, but I'm just going to allow that uncomfortable feeling to be there. And just like a toddler, if they have a temper tantrum and they get no attention for it, what do they start to learn after a while? This does me no good. There's no point in me acting this way. And so that's what will happen over time if you kind of basically treat your brain that same way. No, we're not going to have this. You can freak out. That's okay. And that's where the prefrontal cortex is so important. The other thing Brooke Castillo talks about is just planning. If you want to have sugar, that's fine, but you want to plan out when and exactly how much so that it's always coming from the prefrontal cortex, the adult, the mature brain, versus it being just a knee-jerk reaction to a feeling of being uncomfortable. Okay, so always plan it. She says if you want to have, wine, for example, that's fine. Plan out. I'm going to go to this party. I'm going to have 2 glasses of wine, and that's it. But you always stick with whatever you plan because again, you're always staying in that front prefrontal cortex, that adult brain. So those are just some things to kind of think about as far as really, again, any sort of habit that you feel like you've created that, whether it's good or bad or whatever, you just feel like out of control with it and you feel like you can't really break out of it. So as a quick recap again, we've created habits by creating a reward and by doing something over and over that gives us that reward that is now shifted down into our more primitive toddler brain. And we've created a neural pathway, and our toddler brain, its job is to complete that neural pathway every single time. And when you disrupt that and take away the reward, that dopamine hit, your toddler brain will have a temper tantrum. It will freak out. It will feel like it's going to die. And this is where you can shift into your prefrontal cortex, become aware of it, don't fight it, allow it to be there, and just keep telling yourself that I'm going to be okay, I'm not going to die, and maybe find some healthier alternatives that can kind of calm your brain down just a little bit through that process. So that is, again, sugar addiction, just a different way to look at it, a way that you can stop beating yourself up about it, hopefully, understand the mechanics of really what's going on a deeper level, and again, just start to kind of observe how you respond to these things and then start to work to change those habits. So I hope that helps. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.